Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar on executive education. Today's webinar is going to be on developing quantitative intuition. The full title is Responsive Decision Making Through Quantitative Intuition. So if that's not what you thought you were attending, please stick around. I think it's going to be a good one. My name is Matthew Monagle. I'm the web manager here at Columbia Business School Executive Education. If this is your first webinar with us, as always, we're going to have about 20 minutes of content and about 10 minutes dedicated at the very end for Q&A. As we're going along, if you have any questions that come to mind or any comments you want to make, please just leave them in the comment section at the bottom there. We'll make sure we write them down and save them for the very end. We usually have time to get through about 5 or 6 different questions from presenters, so we should hopefully touch on everything that you want. Now, and here at Executive Education, we always like to say that we're at the intersection of theory and practice, and to prove it, we've brought people from both sides, kind of the best of both worlds. Today we'll be joined by 3 speakers. We'll have Christopher Frank, who's a VP in Global Marketplace Insights at American Express. We'll also be joined by Paul Magnone, who's with the partner organization at Google, and our very own Oded Netzer, who is the Associate Professor of Business here at Columbia Business School. And Paul, I believe you're going to be starting us off.
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks on behalf of Chris and Oded to all of you for joining us today. So let's get started talking about quantitative intuition. On any given workday, if you're starting in the U.S., at the moment you begin your day, you're a third of the day behind Europe and a half day behind Asia. How do you begin? You begin by jumping into an ongoing and potentially overwhelming stream of data and events. You start making hundreds, if not thousands, of business decisions that are required of you every day. I ask myself, do I have a plan for making those decisions? How can I tell what matters? How can I make an impact, and the impact that my business needs against the flood of all this data that's washing over me? These are major concerns for me. I'm assuming they're the same concerns for you. The popular answer seems to be to gather more analytical skills and more tools. Yet the bigger challenge, as highlighted by McKinsey, is the 10-to-1 difference between the data scientists, where we know there's a shortage, and the leaders who know how to use the information for smarter decision-making. Skills and understanding of information and how to gather the insights go beyond the engineers and the researchers. We're surrounded by the researchers and the engineers, but this is the new vocabulary that we as business leaders must all learn. So, as you seek the needle in the haystack, you may want to understand your decision-making style. Very important. Are you focused on compliance or balancing or rank order prioritizing or perhaps a value-based decision approach? These are the things that we've struggled with, and that's some of the thinking that's gone into developing quantitative intuition. So to paraphrase Albert Szent-Györgyi, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering vitamin C, leadership is to see what everybody else has seen and to think what nobody else has thought. So in the next few minutes, we'll touch upon some of the techniques for that leadership and decision-making and discuss personal tools you may choose to help you find the needle in your business haystack. Let's start with a definition of quantitative intuition. I'll read it out. The ability to make decisions with incomplete information via precision questioning and business acumen driven by pattern recognition. This requires a parallel view of the issues that matter rather than just a logical sequence of thoughts to see the situation as a whole. So we believe that the smartest person in the room is the leader who asks the insightful questions and opens up the dialogue. You need to recognize the incomplete information, which is a challenge unto itself, apply precision questioning techniques, and look for the root cause and the patterns that are developing in your business. Too often we're reactive and we're not looking at all of that. But first, it's best to understand how you process the information that comes to you. So let's start with understanding biases.
So I mean, one question that one may ask is, why do we need quantitative intuition? Why not just intuition? I mean, arguably, managers have good intuition about the business, good business acumen. Should we just go with intuition? And one of the reasons why we do need data and intuition is often not enough is different biases in decision making, biases that affect all humans and managers as subsets of humans out there. Just to give you an example, a study that was done was asked people to guess how many gumballs are in a jar, and there were two conditions. In one condition, people went around the table and just said out loud the number that they think are the number of gumballs in the jar. In another condition, people wrote the answer down on a piece of paper. And what they found was that, on average, the answer was much closer to the truth when people actually wrote down their answers on a piece of paper. Now, if you think about what is often happening in a meeting room, it is rarely that way. It is rarely that actually we write down our opinion on a piece of paper and then only verbalize it with a group. It is often we go around the table. There was actually a third condition to that experiment, and in the third condition, what they did is they gave one of the participants a power position, much like a manager or a leader of a meeting. And this person was the first one to make the guess of how many gumballs are in the jar, and actually that condition was by far the worst condition. So when someone with an authority made the first guess, everybody was anchoring around this guess. If this person happened to have a good guess, yes, the answer was often pretty correct, but as often happens, the guess was somewhere around the truth. And when people were independently making the decisions, not being affected by the leader, decisions were actually closer to the truth. This type of bias actually has a name. It was found in 1974 by a Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and it is called anchoring and adjustment, or actually better called anchoring and insufficient adjustment. What often is happening is that there is a number in our mind that is being seeded either by a leader. For example, the example you see there of, I think the firm we are about to acquire is worth $500 million. Once the leader in the meetings mention that number, all estimates are going to gravitate around this number, and people will insufficiently adjust for that type of number. The other example of it, another experiment that we run in class, this is here with our executives and our MBAs, we actually ask people to write down the last two digits of their social security number. And then we run an auction for a real bottle of wine with people actually buying. The highest bidder or the second highest bidder will actually get the wine for the amount that they bid. And the result we get is that people whose last two digits of their social security number is higher than 50 tend to bid much more for the bottle of wine than people with their last two digits of the social security being lower than 50. Freaky, yes. Hoxie, yes. But reality, I mean, people actually pay real money for this, not being even conscious about the effect of this anchor. Just the simple question we asked them before about their last two digits of their social security number. Anchors of that kind are present in our life constantly and affect or bias our decision making. Another theory that went into our thinking of what quantitative intuition is all about came from the theory of psychology of system 1 and system 2 of thinking. System 1 of thinking is the system that controls our intuition, our unconscious type of decision, our emotions. System 2 is the one that actually controls most of our rational thinking and reasoning, the conscious thinking and deliberate thinking. If you think about it, the first thing that comes to mind when you think about quantitative type of information is often system 2. We are going to run different calculations in our mind. We are sitting in a presentation. There are all kinds of tables out there. We are operating on system 2. What we will argue is that actually there is big role in actually bringing in system 1 as part of the assessment of the information. But system 1 alone is not enough. Let me show you a couple of brain teasers that will highlight this point. Some of you may have seen this before. A bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? So probably the first thing that comes to your mind, at least came to my mind the first time I saw this question, was $1.10, right? That would not make a difference of $1 between the two. Actually, the right answer there is a 5 cents and dollar and a 5. But if we were to operate, this is not a difficult math question, so if we were to operate fully on system 2, we would have got the answer. We try to apply here system 1 and actually get the erroneous answer. Here's another one. If it takes 5 machines, 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? System 1, the intuitive one, would probably say 100 minutes. System 2, with a little bit of thinking about the question, it's actually 5 minutes. Last one of these cute brain teasers. In a lake, there is a patch of lily pads. Every day, the patch doubles in size. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long would it take for the patch to cover the half of the lake? Again, system 1, intuition, you would say probably 24 days. System 2, you start to applying more of a deliberate thinking, you realize it's actually 47 days, right? The next day, it's going to cover the whole range. So relying purely on our system 2 is useful, but not enough. We do need our intuition, as we'll mention in a minute. On the other hand, relying purely on system 1, we can see that we can sometimes go wrong. However, still there is use for intuition. And the point I want to make with these biases, and there is a host of other biases that have been studied about decision making, decision-making that often does not use data. As managers, we tend to be overconfident and over-optimistic about decisions that are under uncertainty, and we are likely to be biased about these. Using data can help us make better decisions. And to try and put this together, Chris, Paul, and I came up with this notion of quantitative intuition. And to start, in order to start with this, we started with the notion of intuition. And arguably, when you think about intuition, it sounds almost like an oxymoron of quantitative. Again, quantitative is system 2, intuition is system 1. What is really intuition? Intuition is to have some process that is subconscious, a process that is actually parallel, right? And when you think about quantitative intuition, the idea there is to try and make some of these quantitative analysis in a more intuitive way. When you do that, you tend to move another few thousand feet above the numbers to try and have a parallel observation around what it is that you are thinking. You are working in a parallel analysis of the pieces and bits of information that are thrown your way, which is particularly important in this day and age, as Paul started, of big data. The intuition involves not only the stomach, but actually a combination of the stomach and the brain. Again, is intuition totally the opposite of a quantitative analysis? Let's take an example. Let's take the person that is sitting there in a meeting. We all have experienced this type of a very effective manager. We're sitting in a meeting with a presentation, slide after slide, with tons of tables coming your way. And this very effective leader, what they do is suddenly they stop the meeting and say, wait. That number does not talk to the other number. That number does not fit well with what I know about the business, right? In doing that, did that manager just did a very complex calculation which involves square roots and division and multiplication? Most likely not. What that effective leader has done was actually a parallel rather than sequential thinking, taking numbers from different places in the stream of pieces that the manager was faced with, and actually making a holistic decision about it. That's truly what quantitative intuition is all about. It turned out that QI, quantitative intuition, is actually the reverse of IQ. What we make out of it is that it doesn't necessarily require the type of IQ that we often assign to quantitative analysis, this type of IQ of being able to calculate in your head all kinds of complex calculation. In fact, if you do that, you tend not to see the forest for the tree. You tend to focus too much on the numbers. Again, good, effective quantitative intuition manager is able to look in a more subconscious way at the stream of information arrived and work on it in a more parallel way. So going back to our definition of what is quantitative intuition that Paul started with, now that we understand the notion of biases and intuition, Incomplete information, that's where biases are coming from. When information is complete, we have very little biases, but that's a very utopic situation. We always make decisions with incomplete information. And what it requires is this type of pattern recognition, which can come only from parallel view of the information coming at us, rather than, again, making these very nitty-gritty detailed calculation. It's looking at the situation as a whole. When you think about intuition, one of the things that often comes to mind is, well, how do we teach intuition? Can we actually learn intuition? Intuition seems to be something that is innate in people's skills and ability. The theory of learning has actually two dimensions: consciousness and competence. At the very bottom of it, of the stages of learning, there is the unconscious incompetence. I don't even know what it is that I don't know. At the next step, we have the conscious incompetence. We at least start to realize what it is that we don't know. We start to realize that we are sitting in these presentations and we are overwhelmed by the information. We are moving towards the conscious incompetence. At stage 3, we start to develop the ability to see things in parallel, to think in a more holistic way, looking at the situation as a whole, but it still requires a lot of effort. That's where we are consciously competent. And then stage 4, this is the utopic view, right, where eventually you truly keep exercising this muscle of quantitative intuition, and you get to the totally unconscious competence, where you don't even notice how you are solving these problems. These are indeed these effective managers that call out the numbers in the middle of the meeting. Think about it like driving, right? You don't even notice how you're looking at the mirror and at the same time looking at the road, and all of these good things we do when we are totally unconsciously competent. So I want now to give you a little bit more information about what is the process that we define as quantitative intuition.
So building from the point of unconsciously competent, what is that toolkit that we each need to have? And so we'd love for you to be able to walk away from this webinar with a couple of practical techniques that make a difference in your day, even today. We'd love for you to be able to take at least one question that you hear today, one technique that you hear today, and apply it in a meeting today and see how it makes a difference. So the techniques that we're talking about are born from practical experience that the three of us have had, and we think of it as the fire hose model. And at the core of it all is decision making. So the first set of questions around decision making is to boil down to what is essential information and ask probing questions to get to that. The second is, how do you illuminate unexpected issues? And we'll work through this quickly. The third is, how do you counter short-term thinking? The fourth question is around changing the dialogue with the customer and even within your own organization. Fifth, championing objectivity. Critically important, and more often than not, we are not taking that step back, taking that step objective, both with ourselves and against our clients. The sixth question is about growth. What are the steps that we can take to grow? What are the practical techniques that we can apply in the moment to grow? And then the seventh is, what would compel you to act? Much of what we do is designed to inform people, but not compel people to act. So if we go back to the quantitative intuition model, the first set of questions are around discovery or precision questioning. So what is it that I wish I knew? There are a lot of different techniques buried in this, embedded in this, that we teach. Some of the techniques are around brainstorming, around discovery, asking why multiple times, drilling in further and further to get to the root cause. The next question is around the North Star. What is the customer's North Star? What is your business's North Star? How do you maintain and keep true to that and not deviate from what is most important strategically? And one of the techniques that we teach around that is the customer impact assessment, a simple set of questions that helps you avoid some mistakes that we've certainly seen others make in the market. The squiggly line. Well, if you're up 2 points today and your metric says that, that's probably cause to celebrate. until you take a step back and you ask, why did that happen? If our competition is up 5 points, well, maybe being up 2 points isn't so good. If we're up 2 points and it's because of some anomaly, well, are we going to bet our business on that? Are we going to change our strategic direction? Something to balance against.
Right. And the key, when you think around these 3 questions around discovery, it is foundational and to framing the problem. And one thing we have seen time and again, working on the front line, when we're in meetings in real time, as people are processing information, people have different definitions of the problem they are trying to solve. So these discovery questions, this first leg of the stool of QI, is really around clarifying and framing the problem, and making sure everyone is agreed that that is what you're trying to solve. Then you can now go out and search and gather information.
So the next branch is around interpretation. And so we can think of pattern recognition and really observational skills to infer what's happening. So a simple question like, what surprised you? I challenge you to use this question today. The fact is, we wind up repeating and analyzing and discussing what we already know and don't make the time to ask about what is the driver, what is the unique thing that changes the dialogue, the unique thing that actually will drive the business. And we need to remember that surprise is a bias killer. So we walk in with the bias that Oded took us through before, and asking this simple question can cut through that. The next is around championing objectivity. So lighthouse, the metaphor here is about a ship coming into port. Quite simply, we have to understand what are the variables that matter and the variables that don't. There are hundreds of things that could be on your radar, but only 4 or 5 things that matter the most in the moment. And so how do you compartmentalize? How do you zero in on those elements that matter most that drive your business? How do you grow? Well, in this today's a political day with voting, so the swing voter concept, micro-segmentation. How do you get down to the very specific actions, the very specific drivers that will move a part of your constituent forward? You can play offense or defense on this. You can look at winning new customers. You can look at preserving the customer base. You can look at win-back approaches. There's a variety of things, but understanding that micro-segmentation, the that middle part of that bell curve of your customer set that you say, well, we know who they are. Well, know them better. And then the last part, the last leg, is delivery. So how do you see the situation as a whole? And what would compel you to act? And this is where we often fall down. We talk about the what and the so what. We don't make the space to talk about the now what. How do we make sure that the conversations drive action? Very simple. There's not a lot of technique in here other than making sure that you don't leave the meeting. You don't leave the dialogue saying, hey, guess what? We need another meeting. We've already decided. We already have all the information at hand, and we don't necessarily have to move forward with 100% confidence, with 100% certainty, because you probably won't get there. So as we balance these techniques, you can look at 3 scenarios: a new product launch, an urgent fire drill, or a steady state operation. So I'll go through these quickly. The script that we just went through is jazz. It's not prescriptive. You can bounce from one to the next as the situation comes at hand. In the case of a new product launch, it might be waterfall, or you go 1 through 7 in order because you want to ask a first principle kind of question. What matters most to this new customer set? And go in order. If you have a fire drill, it's Monday morning. Something happened overseas overnight. Some political situation has just bubbled up. Well, you might start with a question around the squiggly line. Do we believe that? Is that something that matters to us? Then you might go to, well, what's surprising about that? Then you might go to, what is it that I really wish I knew about that situation which just bubbled up overnight? And finally, go to, well, now what do we do? It's not that the other questions don't matter, but here's a straightforward path. Finally, steady state operation. We know the business is bubbling along, but we want to do better. So let's ask what surprises us about our customer set, what surprises us about how others are doing better, and what are the things that matter most. So the lighthouse, go to 4 to 5, and then now what? How do we get to the insights that drive our business forward the most? A lot of different ways through this. And we seek to make it simple, and we realize, as H.L. Mencken said, for every complex problem, there's an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. We're not saying these things are simple, but we're saying take a step back, focus on the questions that matter most so that you can frame the problem properly and spend your time judiciously where it matters most. So to wrap up, data, statistics, analytics, we are awash in them. And I think this quote says it best. He uses statistics as a drunken man uses lampposts for support rather than illumination. And we're urging that you use your time preciously focused on illumination and opening up the right dialogue. So with that,
as you can imagine, within 25 minutes, we can do justice to the entire QI, quantitative intuition framework and process. So think about it as the tasting menu. If you think about the different steps of learning, hopefully this brought you at the minimum to the level of the consciously incompetent. Obviously, it takes much more to learn more about these and exercise these skills. And actually, Chris, Paul, and I are teaching full courses on these, a full week of immersing executives in this notion of what is QI, and more importantly, how do we learn how to do it and exercise it.
So Chris, Paul, and Oded, thank you guys so much. We have time for maybe just one or two questions. A few of you have asked throughout the webinar whether you'll get a recording of this. You absolutely will. We're going to be uploading that probably in just a few days. And if you signed up to hear about the webinar, then you'll also get an email from us that lets you know when that is available. So hopefully you'll get that right there. It'll come with the full recording. You'll be able to, as well as the visual of seeing the slides on the page. So I've chosen just two questions because we want to be really conscious of the time that you guys have given to us. And the first one is specifically for Paul and Chris. You came out with your book, Drinking from the Fire Hose, a few years ago, and in the time since, you've had an opportunity to work with academics like Oded, you've worked with other business professionals, you've talked to people about the book. Is there any interesting ways that some of the theories that you presented have come back to you? Is there some ways that maybe people have challenged that or augmented it or helped? And I guess ultimately, do you guys see this as something you might revisit for another book or another lecture series in the future?
Sure. So thank you for the question. This is Chris. So at first, we did see it, I think, as a waterfall. People were looking for a very, I guess, pragmatic approach to deal with the information. And this is when big data started, when the book first came out. And what we've learned just both, from hearing from people that have applied it is, what Paul alluded to is this sense of jazz, that you can bounce around. And in particular, for example, that question, what surprised you? People have told us when they have asked that, whether they're doing deck reviews, looking to make a decision, reviewing data reports, scorecards, that is really, surprised them, the power of that question in particular, in terms of how they have changed the nature of their view of information. The other thing that we heard is, at first people think they have to be a numbers whiz. Oh, teach me some kind of analytic tools, some modeling. And what we have found out or heard about later on is that it is really around this ability to know what information to pull in and how to frame the issue. And that's more important than actually running, a specific model or doing a forecast.
That's great. Thank you. And then kind of the last question specifically, Ed, since you work a lot with MBAs, we had a question as to how you balance your office place. There might not be as many people in the room that have a background in data science. It certainly is something that's finding its way into more and more MBA programs. But what is that balancing act between getting the data analytics people in the room to work with the MBA people and make sure you're making the right decisions?
First, into our MBA program, we definitely enter now more and more business analytics. In fact, we recently brought it into the core class, so all MBA students get business analytics. So we're trying to bring in a little bit more of the data scientist into the MBA in terms of the more quantitative tools. But one thing that Chris, Paul, and I have shared in terms of our thinking of where the true problem is, we don't believe the problem is just in the scarcity of data scientists. We are starting to close this gap. We believe the big problem is in the middle level of executives that can handle and manage these data scientists, and that's exactly what this notion of QI and the framework that we develop and the course that we teach is around that, around not necessarily educating the MBAs or executives how to do the analysis, but actually how to manage the data scientists to make sure that we always ask, for example, the so what and the now what, and not getting lost in crunching the numbers, in paralysis by analysis.
That's great. So for those of you listening who have an MBA, don't worry, you're not being ruled out. We're going to find a way to make sure everybody works together. So Chris and Paul, I know you guys just had to step out for a moment, but I want to say thank you so much for your contributions today. It was great to hear from you. Oded, of course, thank you so much. Is there an easy way? Do you prefer, if people want to follow up with you, Oded, reach out to you with your Columbia email address?
Definitely, and you can put the email out there. It's obviously on my website, but could also be sent.
We'll make sure that the contact information for Oded is part of that email that goes out with the webinar as well. So to everyone that attended today, thank you so much, and we'll hope to see you next time.
Thank you for joining.